Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination is facing an existential threat to his personal freedom. And his explicit goal, and the goal of the party he commands, is to keep him out of prison and to end American democracy as we know it. But today, we saw another demonstration that there are limits to just how far he can bully Republicans into doing his bidding. In the last 24 hours or so, Trump posted video after video issuing orders for vengeance and authoritarian retribution.
America is becoming a banana republic. My whole life, I never got indicted or even thought about it, and now they're indicting me every chance they get. They're trying to steal the election by interfering with the campaign, and we are not going to let that happen. Great American patriots who see what is happening to our country, and they're not going to allow it to continue to happen. To the Democrats, I say, be careful what you wish for. We will expose their corruption for history to see, and justice will be done. So keep on fighting. I hope that Republican district attorneys and attorney generals throughout the country are closely watching the tremendous weaponization of justice that is being utilized against me. Frankly, it's an eye for an eye, or it's fight fire with fire.
To be clear, those are all different videos. That wasn't just one long video. Like, he's just sitting in front of the camera and then, like, just ranting, and then they stop, and then he rants again, and they stop, and they post it. And he seems to be almost single-mindedly focused, as you can see, on the idea of retribution. In an interview with Glenn Beck earlier this week, he pledged to lock up his political opponents if elected president.
You said in 2016, lock her up. And then when you became president, you said, we don't do that in America. That's just not the right thing to do. That's what they're doing. Do you regret not locking her up? And if you're president again, will you lock people up?
Well, I'll give you an example. The answer is you have no choice because they're doing it to us.
On social media, he is barking orders at House Republicans to impeach President Biden, writing, quote, either impeach the bum or fade into oblivion. They did it to us. He also recently called for the impeachment of Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who, of course, indicted him and 18 of his Confederates earlier this month. As I've said again and again, one of the ways that MAGA operates is by cultivating an atmosphere of menace and threat, of physical violence, as a proximate possibility. Trump signals to his followers that intimidation and retribution are just inevitable tools in our civil society. Don't look at me. People are angry. And he tries to give himself the trappings of plausible deniability. It's very clear what he's doing and that his people are listening. But maybe he doesn't command the fear and obedience of all Republicans like he thinks he does. In Georgia, Republican legislators recently passed a law giving them the ability to do what Trump told them to. This is before even Fani Willis indicted. And it is the ability to remove any DA, but specifically, in this case, Fani Willis, from her position as the Fulton County DA so that Trump could effectively walk on the charges. Earlier this week, one Georgia state senator told Steve Bannon that removing Willis using this newly passed law by the Republicans in the state was the only alternative to, get this, a full-blown civil war to stop Trump's indictments.
Now that we've got 19 people who are facing the rest of their life in prison because they spoke out against an election. I mean, I told one senator, I said, listen, we've got to put our heads together and figure this out. We need to be taking action right now, because if we don't, our constituencies are going to be fighting it in the streets. Do you want a civil war? I don't want a civil war. I don't want to have to draw my rifle. I want to make this problem go away with my legislative means of doing so. And the first step to getting that done is defunding Fani Willis.
I don't want violence. I hate violence. I'd hate to take my gun out and have to shoot someone in the head with it. I don't want to do that. I don't want you to be shot by all these people that might take their guns and shoot you, their political enemies. That's not what I want to do. Do you understand? What do you think Donald Trump did in response to that video? He posted another video, same position, praising the guy talking about a civil war.
Highly respected Georgia State Senator Colton Moore deserves thanks and congratulations of everyone for having the courage and conviction to fight the radical left lunatics who are so badly hurting the great state of Georgia and, frankly, the USA itself.
Now, as we've been following this in our coverage, it's been a kind of open question, right? Georgia Republicans passed this law, gave them the power to remove district attorneys. Would they use it to go along with the scheme to remove D.A. Willis? But there's also, as much as Trump wants him to, and obviously there's noises about it, there's also this other factor, which there is something different about the upper echelon of Georgia Republican officials. And it's not that they're necessarily different in principle or character. What is different is that they very much understand that they represent an emerging purple state. They understand that Donald Trump is a political albatross around their necks who just, in a cold, calculating sense, hurts their chances of winning majorities among swing voters. They have seen this brute fact in action over and over and over again.
In the state of Georgia, where there's currently a hand recount being done, Joe Biden is the apparent winner. Again, Joe Biden, the apparent winner in Georgia.
NBC News now projects Raphael Warnock as the winner in the special Georgia Senate election tonight.
NBC News now projecting that Jon Ossoff, the Democrat, will win the Senate runoff in the state of Georgia. And that leads to the projection that Democrats will regain control of the U.S. Senate.
NBC News can now project that the winner of the Georgia U.S. Senate election tonight is incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock.
And after these Georgia Republicans like Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger refused to help Donald Trump pull off his coup in 2020, he did what he always does, right? The same thing we saw him braying about in those videos. He vowed vengeance and retribution. And in this case, he did it by endorsing primary challengers to both men. Former Georgia Senator David Perdue, the one who lost in 2020, in no small part because of Trump, he ran against incumbent Republican Governor Brian Kemp in the primary. He lost by a whopping comical 52 points. Look at that. That's like a Saddam Hussein in Iraq kind of election, okay? Former Georgia Congressman Jody Hice, who declined to run again in a congressional safe seat so he could go and primary Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who was also a big enemy of Trump in Trump's view, lost by a still whopping, though less comical, 19 points. So people like Kemp and Raffensperger are in this unique position. They don't have anything to fear politically from Donald Trump. The implicit threat that, like, he controls his base, his followers will defeat you in a primary challenge if you don't do his bidding, didn't work. Donald Trump came for them, and they defeated him in political combat. They didn't just defeat him, they kicked his butt. They are now unburdened. They rightly understand that the 4 times indicted, twice impeached ex-president is politically toxic, specifically in their state, and specifically to the exact kind of Georgia voters that Georgia Republicans need to consistently win to maintain their electoral fortunes and control the state and retain power for themselves, which is how politicians tend to think and usually do. And so with all that context today, Brian Kemp came out and he answered the question, at least for now, of what Georgia Republicans would do about Fani Willis by effectively telling Donald Trump to take a hike.
Up to this point, I have not seen any evidence that D.A. Willis's actions or lack thereof warrant action by the Prosecuting Attorney Oversight Commission, a special session of the General Assembly to end run around this law is not feasible and may ultimately prove to be unconstitutional. The bottom line is that in the state of Georgia, as long as I'm governor, we're going to follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of who it helps or harms politically. And in Georgia, we will not be engaging in political theater that only inflames the emotions of the moment.